The wagon wheels hit another rut in the dusty road, and Nolan gripped the wooden seat harder, trying not to think about the fact that she had married a complete stranger 3 days ago and was now heading toward a ranch that might not even have walls. Her new husband, Samuel Crawford, sat beside her, his jaw clenched tight as he steered the horses through the Arizona heat, and she wondered if he regretted answering her advertisement as much as she regretted placing it. It was 1883, and the territory stretched wild and unforgiving around them. Georgia had come all the way from Ohio, where her parents had died within months of each other from fever, leaving her with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. A mail-order bride seemed like the only option, and Samuel's letter had been polite enough if brief. He needed a wife. She needed a home. Love was something people in dime novels talked about, not practical folks trying to survive. "Ranch is just over that rise," Samuel said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for the past hour. He was 26, only 3 years older than her, with sandy hair and tired eyes that made him look older. His hands were calloused and worn, evidence of hard work, but his shoulders seemed to carry more weight than just physical labor. Georgia nodded, smoothing down her travel-worn dress. The fabric was plain brown cotton, practical for the journey but showing its age. Everything she owned fit in the single trunk rattling in the back of the wagon. When they crested the hill, her heart sank. The ranch was little more than a weathered cabin with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned precariously to one side, and corrals that held maybe a dozen cattle. The land around it was dry and cracked, dotted with scrub brush and struggling grass. This was supposed to be her new life, her fresh start, and it looked like it might blow away in the next strong wind. Samuel must have sensed her dismay because his voice came out defensive. "I know it's not much. Had some bad years. Drought took most of the herd 2 summers back, and I've been trying to rebuild ever since." "It's fine," Georgia lied, forcing brightness into her voice. What else could she say? She had nowhere else to go, no money to return to Ohio even if she wanted to. "I'm sure we'll make it work." They pulled up to the cabin, and Samuel helped her down from the wagon. His hands were gentle despite their roughness, and he released her the moment her feet touched the ground, as if afraid to presume anything. They were married, yes, but they were strangers who had spoken vows in front of a tired preacher in Ash Fork, Arizona, the nearest town some 15 miles away. The inside of the cabin was as sparse as the outside. One room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A ladder led up to a loft that she assumed was the sleeping area. The furniture consisted of a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove, and some shelves holding basic supplies. Everything was clean, at least, and organized in a way that suggested Samuel took care of what little he had. "I can sleep in the barn," Samuel said quickly, setting her trunk down near the ladder. "Until you're comfortable with things being different." Georgia turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw the exhaustion in his face, the way his shirt hung a bit loose on his frame as if he had recently lost weight. He was trying, she realized. He was as scared and uncertain as she was, maybe more so because this failing ranch was his responsibility, his failure. "You'll sleep in your own house," she said firmly. "We're married. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Relief flickered across his face, followed quickly by something that might have been gratitude. "I'll bring in some water so you can wash up. Supper's usually just beans and cornbread, but I can see if there's anything else." "Beans and cornbread sounds fine." Over the next few weeks, Georgia threw herself into making the cabin livable. She scrubbed every surface, patched the holes in the roof where rain would come through, and attempted to coax a garden from the stubborn soil behind the house. Samuel worked from before dawn until after dusk, trying to keep the cattle healthy and the ranch running. They were polite to each other, cordial even, but there was no warmth between them, no spark of anything beyond mutual survival. The ranch was broke. That much became clear quickly. Samuel had borrowed money from the bank in Ash Fork to buy breeding stock, betting on a good season that never came. The loan payment was due in 3 months, and there was no way they would make it. He tried to hide the worry, but Georgia saw it in the way he stared at the account books each night, his jaw working as he calculated numbers that refused to add up to anything good. "Maybe I could find work in town," Georgia suggested one evening as they sat at the table picking at their meager supper. "I can sew, and I heard the mercantile owner's wife is expecting. She might need help." Samuel's fork clattered against his plate. "My wife isn't going to work in town while I sit here failing at ranching. It's not about failing, it's about getting by until things improve. Things aren't going to improve." The words came out bitter and hard. "I should never have sent for you. You deserved better than this." Georgia set down her own fork, fighting the urge to agree with him. "I'm here now. We make the best of it." They went to bed that night in strained silence, sleeping on opposite sides of the loft with a canyon of space and unspoken resentment between them. Georgia stared at the dark ceiling and wondered if this was all life would ever be. An endless string of days spent struggling for nothing, married to a man she barely knew and didn't love. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Georgia had gone into Ash Fork to buy supplies with the last few dollars they had, taking the wagon by herself since Samuel was trying to repair the barn's foundation. The town was small but bustling, a waypoint between larger settlements that served ranchers and miners from the surrounding territory. She made her purchases quickly, already calculating how to stretch each item as far as possible. She was loading the wagon when she heard the shouting. "Thief!" "Stop him!" A young boy, maybe 10 years old, came tearing down the street with a loaf of bread clutched to his chest. Behind him, the baker was red-faced and furious, waving a rolling pin. The boy's clothes were little more than rags, and his face was so thin that his eyes looked huge. Without thinking, Georgia stepped into the street and caught the boy's arm as he tried to run past. He struggled, terrified, but she held firm. "How much for the bread?" she called to the baker. The man stopped, wheezing. 15 cents, but that's not the point. Can't have street rats stealing whenever they feel like it." Georgia only had 20 cents left to her name, money she had planned to save for thread and needles. She pulled the coins from her pocket and handed over 15 cents. "He's paid for it now." The baker grumbled but took the money and stalked back to his shop. The boy stared up at her with a mixture of shock and suspicion. "What's your name?" Georgia asked, releasing his arm. "Tommy." His voice was barely a whisper. "Where are your parents, Tommy?" "Dead. Got the fever last winter." Georgia's heart clenched. "Do you have anywhere to go?" He shook his head, still clutching the bread like someone might tear it away from him at any moment. She made a decision that was probably foolish, possibly disastrous, but felt right in a way nothing had felt right since she arrived in Arizona. "Come with me." Tommy followed her to the wagon, wary as a wild animal, and she helped him up onto the seat. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, and Georgia spent it wondering how she would explain to Samuel that she had brought home a starving orphan when they could barely feed themselves. Samuel was coming out of the barn when they pulled up. His eyes went from Georgia to Tommy and back again, confusion written plainly on his face. "Samuel, this is Tommy. He's going to stay with us for a while." "Georgia, we can't. He's staying." She said it with a firmness that surprised both of them. "We'll figure it out." For a long moment, Samuel just looked at her and something shifted in his expression. Maybe he saw the determination in her eyes, or maybe he recognized the loneliness of the boy that mirrored his own isolation. Whatever it was, he nodded slowly. All right. He can sleep in the barn loft. It's cleaner than the house loft anyway. Tommy turned out to be a hard worker, grateful for any scrap of kindness. He helped Samuel with the cattle, fixed things around the ranch with a surprising skill for someone so young, and slowly began to fill out as regular meals put meat on his bones. Having him there changed the dynamic between Georgia and Samuel too. They talked more about Tommy's education, about how to stretch the food, about small daily things that gradually made them feel less like strangers. But the money was still running out. 6 weeks after Tommy's arrival, Samuel came back from town with a face like stone. He had been to see the banker about extending the loan, and the answer had been no. They had until the end of the month to come up with $200, or the bank would foreclose on the ranch. We could sell the cattle, Georgia suggested, though she knew it was pointless. Wouldn't bring half what we need. Market's flooded right now. Samuel slumped in his chair, defeated. I'm going to lose everything. Georgia wanted to comfort him, to say something that would make it better, but there were no words that could change the reality of their situation. They were broke, and there was no miracle coming to save them. That night, unable to sleep, Georgia climbed down from the loft and stepped outside for air. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and walked a little way from the cabin, needing space to think. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost missed the sound of hoofbeats. A lone rider was coming up the road, visible in the moonlight. Something about the way he sat his horse, the sheer size of him, made Georgia's heart start to pound. This was wild country, and a woman alone at night was vulnerable. She started to back toward the cabin, but the rider had already seen her. "Evening," he called out, his voice deep and calm. "Didn't mean to startle you." He drew closer, and Georgia got her first real look at him. He was massive, broader across the shoulders than any man she had ever seen, with long dark hair that fell past his collar and a beard that was neatly trimmed. Even in the moonlight, she could see the strength in his frame, the easy way he controlled his horse. He wore buckskin and leather, the clothing of someone who spent most of his time in the wilderness, and there was a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle. "What do you want?" Georgia tried to keep her voice steady. "Looking for the Crawford ranch, this it? Who's asking?" The man swung down from his horse with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. He was even more imposing on the ground, easily over 6 feet tall with muscles that strained the seams of his shirt. But his eyes, when they met hers, were kind. "Name's Fletcher Sutton. I'm a friend of Samuel's brother." Georgia felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Samuel had mentioned a brother who had gone north to Montana years ago, trying his luck at trapping and guiding. They had lost touch, but Samuel spoke of him fondly when he spoke of him at all. "Samuel's asleep," Georgia said. "Can you come back in the morning? Actually, I was hoping to talk to you, Mrs. Crawford." That caught her off guard. "To me?" "Why?" Fletcher shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "Because what I have to say might sound crazy, and I figured you might be more willing to hear me out than Samuel would be." The cabin door opened, and Samuel emerged, hastily dressed and holding a lantern. "Georgia, what's going on? Who's this?" "Fletcher Sutton. You're Samuel Crawford." "I am." Samuel came down off the porch, his free hand drifting toward the knife at his belt. "What's your business here?" "I've got a message from your brother, and a proposition that might solve your money problems." Samuel and Georgia exchanged glances. Samuel gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. We can talk properly." They sat around the small table, Fletcher's bulk making the space feel cramped. He accepted a cup of water but waved off the offer of food, saying he had eaten on the trail. Tommy had woken up and peered down from the barn, but Samuel sent him back to sleep with a reassuring wave. "Your brother Daniel asked me to check on you," Fletcher began. "He heard through some mutual friends that you were having a rough time of it out here." "Daniel always did have a network of gossips," Samuel said, but there was affection in his voice. "How is he? Doing well. Made good money trapping, invested it smart. He's worried about you, though." Fletcher paused, his dark eyes moving between Samuel and Georgia. "Which brings me to why I'm really here. Daniel asked me to bring you north if things were as bad as he heard, set you up with work, help you get back on your feet." "I'm not leaving my ranch," Samuel said immediately. "Hear me out. What if you didn't have to? What if there was a way to save this place and still take the help?" Georgia leaned forward. "What are you talking about?" Fletcher pulled a folded paper from his pocket and smoothed it out on the table. It was a map, hand-drawn but detailed, showing the mountains north of Ash Fork. A spot was marked with an X. About 20 years ago, a man named Jeremiah Hawthorne made a fortune in silver. Built himself a mansion up in the mountains, hidden away from everyone. He was paranoid, thought people would kill him for his money, so he kept the location secret. Place is like something out of a storybook from what I hear. Stone and timber built to last forever. "What does this have to do with us?" Samuel asked, suspicion coloring his tone. "Hawthorne died 5 years ago. No heirs. No one who knew about the place except a few mountain men like me who stumbled across it over the years. It's been sitting empty, falling into disrepair. But the structure's still sound, and there's a cache of silver ingots hidden somewhere on the property." Hawthorne's paranoia meant he never trusted banks. George's pulse quickened. "You're saying there's a hidden mansion full of silver just sitting in the mountains. I'm saying there's a mansion that could solve your problems if you're willing to take a risk." Fletcher looked at Samuel. "Your brother asked me to guide you there if you wanted to go. You could find the silver, sell enough to pay off your debts and keep the rest. Use the mansion as a base for trapping if the ranch doesn't work out. It's an option, at least." Samuel shook his head. "This sounds like a fairy tale. Why hasn't someone else cleaned the place out already?" "Because it's dangerous as hell to reach. The trail up is treacherous, and there are plenty of men who have tried and turned back, or worse. You need someone who knows the mountains, knows how to survive up there." Fletcher's gaze was steady. "That's where I come in. I'll guide you, help you search, take a small cut of whatever we find. Everyone benefits." "How small a cut?" Georgia asked. 10%. That's fair for the risk I'm taking." Samuel stood up, pacing the small space. "Even if this is real, I can't leave the ranch. The cattle need tending, and we're already behind on everything. I can stay and watch the place." Tommy's voice piped up from the loft ladder. They all turned to see the boy climbing down, his young face serious. "I know how to care for the cattle. I can do it." "Tommy, you're 10, Samuel said gently. "I'm almost 11, and I know what needs doing. You've taught me, Miss Georgia, too." The boy's chin jutted out stubbornly. "You need that silver. Let me help." Georgia felt a swell of affection for the scrappy orphan who had become part of their odd little family. She looked at Samuel and saw the same emotion reflected in his eyes. "It would only be for a week or two," Fletcher said. "The trip up and back, time to search." The boy could handle it that long, especially if you left him enough supplies. "This is insane," Samuel muttered, but Georgia could hear the hope creeping into his voice. "We don't even know if this mansion exists." "I've seen it with my own eyes," Fletcher said quietly. "It exists. Whether the silver's still there, that's the gamble. But doing nothing guarantees you lose the ranch. This at least gives you a chance." The 3 adults sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Georgia studied Fletcher, trying to read him. He seemed honest, but she had learned the hard way that seemed was a dangerous word. Still, what choice did they have? "I'll go," she said suddenly. Both men looked at her in surprise. "Georgia, no," Samuel said. "It's too dangerous. You need someone to help search. Two pairs of eyes are better than one, and I'm not fragile." She met Fletcher's gaze. "Is there room for me on this trip? If you can ride and keep up, I don't mind. But your husband's right about the danger. It's not a pleasure ride. I can ride, and I'm tougher than I look." Georgia turned to Samuel. "We should both go. Together we have a better chance of finding the silver, and we can cover more ground." Samuel looked torn, glancing between Georgia, Fletcher, and the ladder where Tommy had retreated. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right. All right, we'll try this crazy thing. But if it looks too dangerous, we turn back." "Agreed, agreed," Fletcher said, standing. He was so tall that his head nearly brushed the ceiling beams. "We should leave at first light. Pack light, bring warm clothes. The mountains get cold at night, even in summer." After Fletcher left to make camp a short distance from the cabin, Samuel and Georgia prepared in tense silence. The reality of what they were about to do seemed to settle over them both. They were going into the mountains with a stranger, chasing a fairy tale and leaving their home in the hands of a child. "Are we being fools?" Samuel asked finally, his voice low so Tommy would not hear. "Probably," Georgia admitted. "But I'd rather be a fool with hope than a wise person with nothing." Something in her words made Samuel smile, really smile, for the first time since she had known him. "When did you get so philosophical?" "When I married a broke rancher and realized life was going to require some optimism." The tension broke, and Samuel actually laughed. It transformed his face, made him look younger, more like the man he must have been before years of drought and debt wore him down. Georgia found herself smiling back, and for a moment they were not two strangers bound by circumstance, but two people sharing a moment of genuine connection. "Thank you," Samuel said softly, "for sticking with this, with me. You could have run the moment you saw this place." "Where would I run to?" Georgia countered, but her tone was gentle. "Besides, I made a commitment. I'm not the running type." They finished packing, and in the gray hour before dawn, they gave Tommy careful instructions about the cattle, the garden, and what to do in case of emergency. The boy listened with solemn attention, and Georgia hugged him tight before they left. "We'll be back before you know it," she whispered against his hair. "Be safe. You too, Miss Georgia." Fletcher was waiting with 3 horses, including a sturdy mare for Georgia. The big mountain man had an easy competence about him as he checked the supplies and adjusted saddles. In the growing light, Georgia could see him more clearly. His face was weathered and tanned, with strong features and eyes that were a surprising shade of amber. His dark hair was thick and slightly wavy where it brushed his shoulders, and his beard could not hide the firm line of his jaw. He was, she realized with a start, quite handsome in a rough, wild way that was completely different from any man she had known. "You ready?" Fletcher asked, catching her staring. Georgia felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself mounting the mare. "Ready." They rode north as the sun came up, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. Fletcher led the way, his broad back straight in the saddle, moving with the kind of confidence that came from years of wilderness living. Samuel rode behind him, tense and alert, and Georgia brought up the rear, trying to match their pace. For the first few hours, they traveled through terrain similar to the ranch, dry and dotted with scrub. But gradually, the land began to change. They climbed steadily, the air growing cooler, and pine trees started to appear among the desert plants. By midday, they were in true mountain country, following a narrow trail that wound between rocky outcroppings and stands of tall timber. Fletcher called a halt near a stream to water the horses and rest. Georgia slid from the saddle gratefully, her legs protesting the long ride. She was a competent rider but not an experienced one, and she could already feel the places where she would have bruises tomorrow. "How are you holding up?" Fletcher appeared beside her, his voice low enough that Samuel, who was seeing to his horse, would not hear. "Fine," Georgia lied. One corner of Fletcher's mouth quirked up. "You're going to be sore as hell tomorrow, but you're doing well for someone who's not used to long rides. How much farther?" "2 more days to reach the mansion, maybe 3 depending on weather and how fast we move." He glanced at the sky, reading something in the clouds that Georgia could not see. "There's a storm coming. We'll need to find shelter tonight." "Is that going to slow us down?" "Maybe, but I'd rather be slow than dead. These mountains don't forgive mistakes." His bluntness was almost refreshing after weeks of Samuel's defeated evasions. Fletcher said what he meant, and there was something reassuring about that even when what he said was not particularly comforting. They ate a quick meal of dried meat and hard biscuits, then mounted up again. The afternoon wore on, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous. Georgia focused on following Fletcher's lead, trusting the mare to pick her footing. She tried not to think about the drops that opened up on one side of the trail, sheer falls that would kill anyone unlucky enough to go over. Fletcher had been right about the storm. By late afternoon, dark clouds were rolling in from the west, and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. He pushed them harder, clearly searching for something, and finally guided them off the main trail to a rocky overhang that created a shallow cave. "We'll camp here," he announced, dismounting. "Get the horses settled and gather whatever dry wood you can find. We need a fire going before the rain starts." They worked quickly, all 3 of them moving with purpose. Georgia had never set up a wilderness camp before, but she followed Fletcher's terse instructions, gathering wood and helping to unsaddle the horses. Samuel seemed more at ease in this environment, his ranching skills translating well to outdoor living. The rain started just as Fletcher got a fire going, a sudden deluge that hammered down like a curtain across the cave entrance. They huddled around the flames, grateful for the warmth and shelter. The temperature had dropped significantly, and Georgia pulled her coat tighter around herself. "We'll take watches tonight," Fletcher said, checking his rifle. "These mountains have bears, mountain lions, and occasionally men who are worse than either." "I'll take first watch, Samuel second, and Mrs. Crawford third." "Call me Georgia," she said. "If we're going to be traveling together, Mrs. Crawford seems overly formal." Fletcher nodded. "Georgia it is, and you can call me Fletcher, both of you." They ate another simple meal, and Samuel spread out their bedrolls near the fire. There was an awkward moment when Georgia realized how close they would all be sleeping. The cave was not large, and they needed to stay near the fire for warmth, but exhaustion won out over propriety. She lay down between Samuel and the cave wall, using her saddle as a pillow, and was asleep within minutes. She woke to darkness and someone gently shaking her shoulder. Fletcher's voice came soft in her ear. "Your watch. Storm's past, but stay alert." Georgia sat up, rubbing her eyes. The fire had burned down to embers, and she added wood carefully, building it back up. Fletcher settled into his bedroll with a tired sigh, and within moments, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Samuel was already snoring softly on the other side of the fire. The night was quiet except for the crackling flames and the distant call of an owl. Georgia sat with Fletcher's rifle across her knees, feeling the weight of responsibility. She had never kept watch before, never been the one standing between safety and danger. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Movement near the horses made her tense, but it was just the mare shifting position. Georgia forced herself to relax, to breathe. She found her eyes drawn to Fletcher's sleeping form. Even in repose, he looked powerful, his broad shoulders and muscular arms evident beneath the blanket. He had calloused hands like Samuel, but where her husband's calluses came from ropes and ranch work, Fletcher spoke of rifles and reins, of a life lived in wild places. She wondered about him, this mountain man who had appeared out of nowhere with a crazy story and an offer of hope. What kind of man chose a life of solitude in the wilderness? What had driven him away from towns and settlements? And why had he agreed to help two strangers he had no real connection to? The night passed slowly, and when dawn finally began to lighten the eastern sky, Georgia woke Fletcher for his turn. He came alert instantly, completely present in a way that fascinated her. There was no grogginess, no slow wake-up. One moment he was asleep, the next he was awake and aware. "Any trouble?" he asked quietly. "All quiet." "Good. Get some more sleep. We have a hard ride ahead." Georgia lay back down, but sleep eluded her now. She watched through half-closed eyes as Fletcher tended the fire and began preparing coffee. He moved with economical grace, every motion purposeful and practiced. When the coffee was ready, he poured a cup and held it out to her. "Thought you might be awake." She sat up and accepted the cup, wrapping her hands around the warmth. "Thank you." They sat in companionable silence as the dawn brightened. Samuel stirred eventually, and they broke camp efficiently, packing up the wet gear and saddling the horses. The storm had left everything dripping and muddy, but the air smelled clean and fresh. The second day of riding was harder than the first. George's muscles screamed in protest, and the trail seemed to grow more difficult with each mile. They climbed steadily into higher elevations, the pine forests giving way to rocky terrain where trees clung to impossible slopes. Fletcher maintained a steady pace, never too fast but never slow enough to be comfortable. Around midday, they stopped at a place where the trail widened slightly, offering a view of the valleys below. Georgia dismounted stiffly and walked to the edge, gasping at the vista spread before her. Mountains rolled away in every direction, blue and purple in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer season. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Fletcher came to stand beside her, so close that she could feel the warmth radiating from his large frame. "This is why I live up here. Can't imagine going back to towns and people after seeing this every day." "You live alone?" "Mostly. I have a cabin about 50 miles north of here on the other side of the range. I trap in winter, guide hunters and travelers in summer when I need money." "It's a good life." "A lonely one, though." He glanced down at her, his amber eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, but loneliness is better than being around people who don't understand you." There was something in his voice that suggested experience, old pain perhaps. Georgia wanted to ask more, but Samuel called to them that it was time to move on. They rode until dark, making camp in another sheltered spot. This time there was no storm, just a clear night with stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. After supper, Samuel fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the day's ride. Georgia sat by the fire, too sore and tired to sleep despite her exhaustion. Fletcher was checking their supplies, taking inventory of food and ammunition with methodical care. "How did you meet Samuel's brother?" Georgia asked, partly because she was curious and partly because the silence felt too heavy. "Ran into each other up in Montana about 3 years back. He was working as a guide for a mining outfit and I was trapping. We ended up weathering a bad blizzard together in a cabin, spent 2 weeks snowed in. You get to know someone pretty well in that situation. He must be a good friend if you're willing to help his brother like this." Fletcher shrugged his massive shoulders. "Daniel did me a solid turn once." This is me returning the favor. Besides, I don't mind the company sometimes. Gets quiet in the mountains. I thought you preferred quiet. I prefer it to noise. But that doesn't mean I don't enjoy good conversation when I can get it. Georgia smiled. Is this good conversation? Better than talking to my horse. They lapsed into silence again, but it was easier now, less awkward. Georgia found herself relaxing despite the unfamiliar surroundings, despite being alone by a fire with a man who was not her husband. There was something solid and trustworthy about Fletcher, a sense that he said what he meant and followed through on his words. "Why did you marry Samuel?" Fletcher asked suddenly. "If you don't mind me asking." Georgia considered the question. "I didn't have much choice. My parents died, left me with nothing. A mail-order marriage seemed like the only option." "That's practical, but it's not much of a life, is it? Marrying a stranger out of necessity." "No," Georgia admitted. "It's not, but I'm trying to make the best of it. Samuel's a good man, even if we don't love each other. Maybe that will come with time." Fletcher poked at the fire with a stick, sending up sparks. "Maybe. Or maybe love isn't something you can force just because it would be convenient. You sound like you have experience with that." "I was married once. Young and stupid, thought love was enough to overcome anything. Turned out I was wrong." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Georgia heard the old hurt underneath. "She hated the wilderness, hated the isolation, left me for a banker in Denver. Can't say I blame her. She wanted a life I couldn't give. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me that some people are meant for different things. She needed civilization. I need this." He gestured at the mountains around them. "Better to know that early than waste years trying to change each other." Georgia thought about that as she finally settled into her bedroll. Was she trying to change herself to fit Samuel's life? Or was she simply doing what was necessary to survive? She did not have answers, and sleep claimed her before she could think too deeply about it. The third day brought them into truly remote country. The trail was barely visible in places, and Fletcher had to dismount several times to check for signs of the right path. The vegetation had changed again, becoming alpine meadows interspersed with rocky outcrops and dense stands of evergreens. "We're close," Fletcher said as they stopped for a midday break. "Another few hours, maybe." Georgia felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. What if the mansion was not there? What if the silver was gone? What if this whole journey was for nothing? But she pushed the doubts away. They had come too far to turn back now. The trail led them through a narrow pass between two peaks, and on the other side, the land opened up into a hidden valley. A stream ran through the center, fed by snowmelt from the heights above, and the grass was thick and green. And there, nestled against the far slope beneath a rocky cliff face, stood the mansion. It was extraordinary. Built of stone and timber, it rose 3 stories high, with wide verandas and tall windows that caught the afternoon light. The architecture was a strange mix of frontier practicality and Eastern elegance, as if the builder had been trying to recreate something from his past in this wild setting. Parts of it showed neglect, missing roof tiles and sagging porches, but the basic structure looked solid. "There it is," Fletcher said, satisfaction in his voice. "Hawthorne's Folly." They rode closer, and Georgia could see more details. Outbuildings surrounded the main house, including a large stable and what looked like a workshop. Gardens had once existed here, now overgrown but still showing traces of their former glory. It was like stumbling onto a lost world, a piece of civilization hidden away from everything. "This is incredible," Samuel breathed. "How did someone build this up here?" "Hauled materials up piece by piece over the course of 5 years, or so the story goes. Hawthorne was obsessed, spent his entire fortune creating his perfect hideaway." Fletcher dismounted and helped Georgia down from her mare. Now we just have to figure out where he hid the silver." They approached the mansion cautiously, Fletcher leading with his rifle ready. But the place was clearly abandoned, the only occupants the small animals that scattered at their approach. The front door was locked, but Fletcher made short work of it with a strong shoulder, and they stepped inside. The interior took George's breath away. High ceilings, ornate woodwork, and even a crystal chandelier hanging in the entrance hall, dusty and cobwebbed but still magnificent. Furniture sat draped in sheets, and paintings hung on the walls, their subjects obscured by years of neglect. It was like a tomb, a memorial to one man's paranoia and vision. "We should search systematically," Fletcher said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "This place is huge, could take days to go through it all properly." They split up, each taking a section of the house. Georgia found herself in what must have been a library, walls lined with books that had suffered from moisture and time. She searched methodically, looking behind bookcases, checking for hidden compartments, but found nothing. The search continued as afternoon faded into evening. They regrouped in the kitchen, a massive space with a stone fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig. Fletcher had found a cellar full of preserved goods and wine, still intact. Samuel had discovered several empty rooms on the second floor. Georgia reported her findings, or lack thereof. "He wouldn't have made it easy," Fletcher mused, staring at the walls as if they could give him answers. "A man that paranoid would have created a hiding place that was secure but accessible to him, something he could reach quickly if needed." "The master bedroom," Samuel suggested. "If he lived here alone, that's where he would have spent most of his time." They climbed the stairs to the third floor, where the master's suite occupied the entire front of the house. The bedroom was opulent even in its decay, with a four-poster bed, elaborate wardrobes, and a fireplace faced with marble. Windows looked out over the valley, providing a commanding view of anyone approaching. Fletcher began examining the fireplace, running his hands over the stones. "There's something off about this. The stones on this side are a different color, like they've been moved recently. Well, recently in relative terms." He pressed and prodded, and suddenly, with a grinding sound, a section of the marble facing swung inward, revealing a dark space behind. Samuel grabbed a lamp and they crowded around to look. The hiding place was not large, but it was full. Silver ingots were stacked neatly, dozens of them, along with several leather pouches that clinked with the sound of coins. There were also papers, deeds, and documents that would need closer examination. "We found it," Georgia whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "It's real." Fletcher reached in and pulled out one of the ingots, testing its weight. "This is good silver, high quality. There must be thousands of dollars worth here." Samuel was staring at the cash with an expression caught between joy and disbelief. "This is enough to save the ranch. More than enough. We could pay off the bank and have money left over for stock, for repairs, for everything." They spent the next hour carefully removing the silver and pouches, laying everything out to count and assess. By the time they finished, the total was staggering. At current prices, the silver alone was worth over $3,000. The coins added another $500. It was a fortune, more money than any of them had ever seen. 10% was what we agreed on," Samuel said to Fletcher, his voice serious. "That's $350 for you, more than fair for your help." "The deal was 10% of what you found," Fletcher corrected. "You found it, I just got you here. You knew where to look. Without you, we never would have found this place or the silver." Samuel extended his hand. $350, take it." After a moment, Fletcher shook his hand. "Fair enough, I'll take my share in coins if you don't mind." Easier to carry. They divided the treasure, Fletcher taking his portion in gold coins and a few small silver pieces. The rest they carefully packed for transport, knowing it would take multiple trips to carry it all down the mountain. The mansion had beds, and despite the dust, they were far more comfortable than sleeping on the ground. They made up 3 rooms, and for the first time since leaving the ranch, they would sleep in proper comfort. Georgia took one of the smaller bedrooms, grateful for the privacy and the chance to wash properly from a basin of water Fletcher had pumped from the old well. That night, they ate better than they had in days, using supplies from the cellar and fresh meat that Fletcher had shot earlier in the day. They sat around the kitchen table, the lamp casting warm light, and talked about what this discovery meant. "I can pay off the bank, buy new breeding stock, fix the barn, maybe even hire some help," Samuel said, his face more animated than Georgia had ever seen it. "This changes everything." "You can build a real life," Fletcher agreed. "Get the ranch profitable, provide for your family." Georgia caught the way Fletcher said the word family, the slight wistfulness in his tone. She thought about what he had told her about his failed marriage, about choosing the wilderness over companionship. It seemed suddenly very sad, this strong, capable man living alone in the mountains. "What will you do with your share?" she asked him. "Haven't decided yet. Maybe improve my cabin, stock up on supplies for winter, or maybe I'll just save it. It's good to have a reserve for hard times." He smiled, transforming his rugged face. "Though I might buy myself a new rifle, been wanting one of those Winchester repeaters." They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily now that the pressure of the search was over. Georgia learned that Fletcher had been born in Kentucky, moved west with his family as a boy, and lost them to illness when he was 16. He had been on his own ever since, learning to survive in the wilderness through trial and error, and the kindness of other mountain men who taught him their skills. "Never wanted to settle down again after my marriage fell apart," he said. "Figured I was better off alone. But I have to admit this has been nice, having people to talk to, working toward a common goal." "You should visit us at the ranch," Samuel said impulsively. "Once we get back and things are settled, you're always welcome." Fletcher looked touched. "I might take you up on that." Georgia excused herself eventually, exhausted by the long day and the emotional roller coaster of the discovery. She climbed the stairs to her borrowed bedroom, which faced out over the valley. The moon was up, casting silver light across the meadow, and she stood at the window for a long moment, absorbing the beauty and strangeness of this place. A soft knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." It was Fletcher, looking uncomfortable in the doorway. "Sorry to bother you. Just wanted to make sure you were all right. This place can feel a bit haunted at night." "I'm fine. More than fine, actually." She gestured at the room. "This is the nicest place I've slept since leaving Ohio." He nodded, but he did not leave. Something in his posture suggested he wanted to say more but was not sure how. Georgia waited, patient. "You're not happy with Samuel," Fletcher said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "I can see it. The way you are together, it's polite, but there's no real connection." Georgia felt heat rise in her face. "That's not really your concern. I know, and I'm overstepping. But Georgia, life's too short to spend it with someone you don't love. Take it from someone who learned that the hard way." "What would you have me do, leave him?" "I have nowhere to go, and besides, he's not a bad man. We'll make it work." "Will you?" Fletcher took a step into the room, and suddenly the space felt very small. He was so large, so present, that he seemed to fill every corner. "Or will you just spend years being polite strangers who share a bed?" "Fletcher, I'm not trying to cause trouble, I just—" He stopped, running a hand through his long hair in frustration. "Hell, I don't know what I'm doing. Forget I said anything." He turned to go, but Georgia found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Wait." He stopped, looking back at her. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not happy with Samuel, but I'm trying to be realistic. Love is a luxury people like me can't afford." "That's where you're wrong." Fletcher's voice was intense, his amber eyes locked on hers. "Love isn't a luxury. It's the only thing that makes this hard life worth living." The air between them felt charged, electric. Georgia's heart was pounding, and she knew she should ask him to leave, should step back, should do anything but stand there staring at this mountain man who was saying things that reached right into her chest and squeezed. "I should go," Fletcher said, but he did not move. "Yes," Georgia agreed, but she did not look away. The moment stretched, taut as a rope about to snap. Then Fletcher took a step backward, breaking the spell. "Good night, Georgia." "Good night," he left, closing the door softly behind him, and Georgia sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly weak. What had just happened? Nothing, technically. They had just talked, but it had felt like something momentous, like standing on the edge of a cliff and looking down. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about Fletcher's words or the way her pulse had raced when he stood close to her. This was ridiculous. She was a married woman. Fletcher was helping them out of kindness to a friend. There was nothing between them and could be nothing. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, it was Fletcher's face she saw in her mind, not Samuel's. The next morning, Fletcher announced that they should spend one more day at the mansion to rest the horses and make sure they had not missed anything important in their search. Samuel agreed readily, already making plans to explore the outbuildings and assess what other valuables might be salvaged from the property. Georgia volunteered to go through some of the documents they had found in the hidden compartment, hoping to find anything that might be useful. She set up in the library, spreading the papers out on a large desk that had somehow survived the years in decent condition. Most of the documents were deeds to properties that probably no longer existed or were worthless now. But there were also personal papers, and as Georgia read through them, a story emerged. Jeremiah Hawthorne had been a successful merchant who struck it rich in the silver boom. But he had also been deeply troubled, convinced that business partners were trying to kill him, that his family wanted him dead for his money. He had fled to the mountains to escape his paranoia, building this mansion as his fortress. The last entry in his journal was dated just weeks before he died. In shaky handwriting, Hawthorne wrote about his loneliness, his regret at pushing everyone away, his realization that all the silver in the world could not buy back the relationships he had destroyed with his suspicion and fear. It made Georgia incredibly sad. This beautiful mansion, all this wealth, and Hawthorne had died alone, consumed by the very thing he had been trying to escape. "Find anything interesting," she jumped, not having heard Fletcher enter the library. He moved with surprising quiet for such a large man. "Just the tragic story of a lonely man," Georgia said, holding up the journal. "Hawthorne spent his last years alone in this beautiful place, regretting his choices." Fletcher came to look over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel his warmth, smell the scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. Cautionary tale. About what? About letting fear rule your life. Hawthorne was so afraid of being hurt that he cut himself off from everything. In the end, the isolation killed him as surely as any enemy would have. Georgia set down the journal, very aware of Fletcher's presence behind her. "Is that what you're doing? Living in the mountains alone because you're afraid, maybe?" His voice was thoughtful. "Or maybe I'm just realistic about what I have to offer. Some men are meant for families and settled lives. Others are meant for different things. That sounds like an excuse. Maybe it is." Georgia turned in her chair to look up at him. "Why did you really agree to guide us up here?" "Was it just to help Daniel's brother?" Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes searching her face. At first, yes, but then I met you and I don't know. Something about you made me want to help, made me want to be around people again, even though I've spent years convincing myself I'm better off alone. George's breath caught. This was dangerous territory, a conversation they should not be having. But she could not seem to stop herself from asking, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think I made a mistake taking this job. Because now I'm going to have to watch you go back to a life that doesn't make you happy, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it." Fletcher, he held up a hand. "I know, you're married. You have obligations. I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I just needed to say it out loud once. You deserve to be happy, Georgia. You deserve someone who looks at you like you hang the moon, not someone who's grateful you're willing to tolerate his failures." Before she could respond, he turned and walked out of the library, leaving Georgia sitting there with her heart racing and her mind in turmoil. Everything he said was true. Samuel was a good man, but there was no passion between them, no real connection beyond shared necessity. With Fletcher, even in these few short days, she had felt more alive, more seen than she had in months with her husband. But what could she do? She was married. She had made vows, and Fletcher was a mountain man who lived alone by choice. Even if she were free, what kind of life could they have together? She spent the rest of the day avoiding both men, claiming she needed to continue working through the documents. In truth, she just needed space to think, to sort through the emotions churning inside her. That evening, Samuel sought her out. They walked together through the overgrown gardens, the setting sun painting everything gold. "This place is incredible," Samuel said, gesturing at the mansion. "I've been thinking, Georgia, once we get the ranch profitable, maybe we could come back up here sometimes. Use it as a summer retreat. It seems a shame to leave it empty." "That's a nice idea." Samuel stopped walking, turning to face her. "Are you all right? You've been quiet today." "Just tired." "It's been an eventful few days." He nodded, accepting the explanation, but his eyes were troubled. "Georgia, I know this hasn't been what you hoped for. The ranch, our marriage, all of it. But I want you to know that I'm grateful you stayed, that you're trying to make it work. And with this silver, things will be better. I promise." Georgia felt a surge of guilt. Samuel was trying, and she was standing here thinking about another man. "I know you'll do your best. Maybe we could, I don't know, try to build something real between us. Now that the pressure's off, now that we can breathe." He reached for her hand awkwardly. "I'd like that, if you would." She looked at his earnest face, at the hope in his eyes, and felt something crack inside her. He deserved honesty. They both did. "Samuel, I need to tell you something." "All right. I don't love you. I wish I did, but I don't, and I don't know if I ever will." The words came out in a rush, painful but necessary. "You're a good man, and you deserve someone who can give you more than polite tolerance. I'm not sure I'm that person." Samuel's face went through a series of expressions: hurt, confusion, and then, surprisingly, something that looked like relief. "I know. I've known since you arrived and looked at the ranch like it was a prison sentence. I don't love you either, Georgia. I wish I did, but I don't." They stared at each other, the truth finally spoken aloud after weeks of pretending. "So what do we do?" Georgia asked. "I don't know. We're married. We made promises." "Promises made out of desperation, not love." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, then said, "There's something between you and Fletcher. I'd have to be blind not to see it." Georgia felt her face flush. "Nothing has happened, I swear. I believe you, but something could happen if things were different." He took a deep breath. "Georgia, I'm not going to hold you to vows that neither of us wanted to make. If you want to leave, if you want to be with him, I won't stop you." "Are you serious?" "I want you to be happy. And I want to be with someone who actually wants to be with me, not someone who's stuck with me because she has no other options." His smile was sad but genuine. "We could get the marriage annulled when we get back. You were married under false pretenses, not knowing how bad things really were. Any judge would grant it." Georgia felt tears sting her eyes. "Samuel, are you sure?" "I'm sure. Life's too short to spend it with the wrong person. My parents had that, a real love match, and watching them together taught me what I should be looking for. This isn't it, Georgia, for either of us." She hugged him impulsively, grateful for his understanding, for his kindness even in the face of rejection. "Thank you. You really are a good man." "So are you. A good woman, I mean." He pulled back, smiling. "Now you should probably go talk to Fletcher before he spends the rest of the night brooding in the stable." "He's in the stable. Has been since this afternoon. I think he's trying to stay away from both of us." Georgia found Fletcher in the stable, as Samuel had said, checking on the horses even though they had been checked several times already. He looked up when she entered, wariness in his eyes. "Samuel and I talked," Georgia said without preamble. "We're going to get the marriage annulled." Fletcher went very still. "What? He knows about how I feel about you." She took a step closer. "He's releasing me from the marriage. He wants both of us to have a chance at real happiness." "Georgia, you can't make a decision like this because of a few conversations. You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you're honest and brave and kind. I know you make me feel things I've never felt with Samuel. I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I haven't felt since my parents died." She was close enough now to touch him, to see the emotions warring in his face. "I know this is fast and crazy, but everything about the past few weeks has been fast and crazy. Maybe that's just how life works sometimes. I live in the mountains, Georgia, miles from the nearest settlement. It's a hard life, lonely most of the time. I can't offer you comfort or security." "I don't want comfort or security. I want to be with someone who makes me feel alive." She reached up to touch his bearded face, feeling the roughness of his skin, the strength in his jaw. "I want you, Fletcher, if you'll have me." For a moment he did not move, did not breathe. Then, with a sound that was half growl, half sigh, he pulled her against him. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and his mouth found hers in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste peck she had exchanged with Samuel at their wedding. This kiss was fire and hunger, months of loneliness and longing poured into a single moment. Georgia melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath the fabric. He was so big, so strong, and yet he held her like she was something precious, something to be cherished. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure? Really sure?" "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time." "Then yes." "Yes, I'll have you. I'll spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of this gift you're giving me." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring each other. Georgia felt like she was flying, like all the weight she had been carrying for months had suddenly lifted. This was right. This was where she was supposed to be. They returned to the mansion together, hand in hand, to find Samuel waiting for them with a knowing smile. "I take it you two worked things out." "We did," Fletcher said. "And I want to thank you, Samuel. Not many men would be this understanding. I want both of you to be happy, and I want to be happy too, which means finding someone who actually wants this life with me." Samuel gestured at the silver they had packed. "With this, I have the chance to build something real, so do you too. Let's not waste it." They spent one more night at the mansion, but the atmosphere was completely different now. There was no awkwardness, no unspoken tension. They made plans, talking late into the night about the future. Samuel would return to the ranch with his share of the silver, pay off the bank, and start rebuilding. Tommy would stay with him, and Samuel was already talking about officially adopting the boy, giving him the family he had lost. Fletcher and Georgia would go north to his cabin, taking some time to get to know each other properly before deciding on next steps. They would marry once Georgia's annulment was final, but in their hearts, the commitment was already made. The journey down the mountain was completely different from the journey up. Georgia rode beside Fletcher, their horses close enough that their legs occasionally brushed. They talked constantly, sharing stories, learning each other's histories, building the foundation of a real relationship. Samuel rode ahead, giving them space, and seemed genuinely happy for them. His burden was lifting too, Georgia realized. He would return to the ranch with hope instead of despair, with the freedom to find someone who truly wanted to share his life. When they reached the ranch, Tommy came running out, relief and joy on his young face. "You're back. I was starting to worry." "Told you we'd come back," Samuel said, dismounting and ruffling the boy's hair. "And we brought good news." They showed Tommy the silver, explained how it would save the ranch, and watched his face light up with happiness. Then Samuel explained the other change, that Georgia would be leaving with Fletcher. Tommy looked sad for a moment, then nodded with the pragmatic acceptance of a child who had learned early that life brought changes. "Will you visit sometimes?" "Of course," Georgia promised, hugging him tight. "Your family, Tommy, that doesn't change just because I'm not living here." They stayed at the ranch for 2 more days while Georgia gathered her few possessions and said proper goodbyes. Samuel rode into Ash Fork to start the process of the annulment and pay off the bank, returning with a grin that made him look 10 years younger. "The banker nearly fainted when I put all that silver on his desk," Samuel reported. "Then he tried to act like he had always had faith in me. Hypocrite." "You're free and clear?" Fletcher asked. "Free and clear. The ranch is mine outright, and I have money left over for stock and improvements. Plus, I talked to the judge. He'll grant the annulment in a few weeks, no questions asked." Samuel looked at Georgia. "You'll be free to marry again soon." Georgia felt a weight lift that she had not even realized she was carrying. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything. Thank you for giving me permission to find what I really need. We both deserve that." On the 3rd morning, Georgia and Fletcher prepared to leave. She had said her goodbyes to Tommy the night before, not wanting to draw out the pain. Samuel walked them out to where the horses were waiting. "You take care of her," Samuel said to Fletcher, shaking his hand firmly. "She's special." "I know, and I will. You have my word." Samuel turned to Georgia, and for a moment they just looked at each other, these two people who had been thrust together by circumstance and were now parting as friends. "Be happy," Samuel said simply. "You too." Then she was mounting up, settling into the saddle beside Fletcher. They rode north, not looking back, heading toward a new life in the mountains. The journey to Fletcher's cabin took 4 days of steady riding through some of the most beautiful country Georgia had ever seen. They followed game trails through dense forests, crossed crystal-clear streams, and camped each night under skies so full of stars it seemed impossible. And each night, Fletcher held her close, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill. They talked for hours, sharing dreams and fears, learning each other's quirks and habits. He told her about the wildlife he encountered, the changing seasons in the high country, the satisfaction of living off the land. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, her parents' love story, her own dreams of having a family someday. "The cabin's not fancy," Fletcher warned as they approached on the 4th day. "It's just a place to sleep and store supplies, but it's solid and the location's good." The cabin sat in a small valley surrounded by towering pines, with a stream running nearby and a view of distant peaks. It was small, just 2 rooms, but well built and maintained. A wood stove provided heat, and there was even a real bed, a luxury in wilderness living. "It's perfect," Georgia said, and meant it. This place felt right in a way the ranch never had. It was isolated, yes, but that isolation felt like freedom rather than imprisonment. They settled in quickly, falling into a routine. Fletcher checked his trap lines and hunted for meat, while Georgia set about making the cabin more comfortable. She used some of Fletcher's share of the silver to order supplies from the nearest trading post, including fabric for curtains, proper dishes, and books to fill the long winter evenings. The weeks passed, summer fading toward autumn, and Georgia found herself happier than she had ever been. Fletcher was attentive and affectionate, never taking her for granted, always making sure she knew how much he valued her presence. And the physical side of their relationship, once Georgia's annulment was final and they could properly be together, was a revelation. Fletcher was passionate but gentle, always mindful of her comfort, and Georgia discovered depths of feeling she had not known existed. They were married in late October by a traveling preacher who passed through the mountains. The ceremony was simple, held outside the cabin with the autumn leaves falling around them like golden rain. There were no guests, except for a family of trappers Fletcher knew, but it felt more real and meaningful than Georgia's first wedding had ever been. "I love you," Fletcher said as he slipped a simple gold band on her finger, a ring he had commissioned from a jeweler in Flagstaff using some of the silver money. "I'll love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Georgia replied, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for giving me this life." That winter was hard, as mountain winters always are. Snow piled deep, and there were days when they could not leave the cabin. But Georgia loved it. She loved the enforced intimacy, the long evenings by the fire, the sound of wind howling outside while they were safe and warm within. Fletcher taught her to read animal tracks, to identify different trees, to shoot his rifle in case she ever needed to defend herself. She taught him to appreciate books, to enjoy music from the harmonica she had bought, to open up about his feelings instead of keeping everything locked inside. Spring came eventually, as it always does, and with it, visitors. Samuel and Tommy rode up to the cabin in early April, bringing supplies and news. "The ranch is doing great," Samuel reported, looking healthier and happier than Georgia had ever seen him. "New stock is thriving, and I hired a couple of hands to help with the work. Tommy's learning everything I can teach him. And Samuel has a lady friend," Tommy added with a mischievous grin. "Her name's Margaret, and she makes really good pie." Samuel blushed but did not deny it. "She's a widow from Ash Fork. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. It's early days yet, but I think it might be serious." "I'm so happy for you," Georgia said, hugging him. "You deserve someone wonderful, so do you. And it looks like you found him." Samuel shook Fletcher's hand warmly. "You both look well. Mountain life agrees with you." They stayed for 3 days, and it was good to catch up, to share stories and laughter. But when they left, Georgia felt no sadness. Her life was here now with Fletcher in these wild mountains. The months and years that followed were good ones. Fletcher and Georgia built a life together based on mutual respect, deep love, and shared purpose. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room for storage and eventually a third room for the baby that came 2 years after their marriage. Georgia gave birth to a daughter in the spring of 1886, with the help of a midwife from a nearby settlement. Fletcher was terrified through the whole process, pacing outside like a caged bear, but when he finally held his daughter, tears streamed down his rugged face. "She's perfect," he whispered, cradling the tiny infant against his massive chest. "You're perfect, both of you." They named her Rose after Georgia's mother, and she grew up wild and free in the mountains. A son followed 2 years later, then another daughter. The cabin was expanded again to accommodate the growing family. And their life, while never easy, was rich in all the ways that mattered. Samuel and Margaret married and had children of their own. Tommy grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the ranch work and later inheriting it when Samuel decided to retire. The two families visited regularly, maintaining a friendship that had been forged in desperate times and strengthened by mutual respect. Fletcher proved to be an extraordinary father, patient and loving, teaching his children everything he knew about the wilderness while Georgia made sure they could read and write and understand there was a wider world beyond the mountains. It was a balance, preparing them to choose their own paths while giving them the skills to thrive in whatever life they chose. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Georgia back to Hawthorne's mansion. They had visited it several times over the years, using it as a retreat, and had even done some work to maintain it. The place had become their special sanctuary, a reminder of where their love story had truly begun. They stood in the library where Fletcher had first confessed his feelings, his arms around her from behind, both of them older and weathered by mountain life but no less in love. "You ever regret it?" Fletcher asked. "Giving up the chance at a settled life for this wild one?" Georgia turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her whole world. There were strands of gray in his dark hair now, and lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but he was still the strongest, most capable man she had ever known. And more importantly, he was kind and loving, the partner she had never dared to hope for. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "This life with you, our children, these mountains, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me everything I needed, Fletcher. Love, purpose, a real home. How could I ever regret that?" He kissed her then, a kiss that still made her heart race after 10 years of marriage, and she thought about how different her life might have been if she had stayed with Samuel, if Fletcher had never appeared with his crazy story about a hidden mansion. But he had appeared, and she had been brave enough to choose love over security, passion over propriety. It had been the right choice, the best choice, and she had never looked back. They spent that night at the mansion, making love in the master bedroom where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. And in the morning, they rode back to their cabin, to their children, to the life they had built together in the wild heart of the Arizona mountains. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, summer droughts that threatened the game they depended on, and the usual scrapes and scares that came with raising children in remote country. But through it all, Georgia and Fletcher faced everything together, their love the bedrock on which everything else was built. Their children grew strong and capable. Rose, their eldest, inherited her father's love of the wilderness and her mother's practical nature. She eventually married a young trapper Fletcher had mentored, and they built their own cabin a few valleys over, close enough to visit but far enough to have their own space. Their son James was more scholarly, with a love of books that rivaled George's. He eventually left the mountains to attend university in California, though he returned every summer to help his father with the trap lines. Their youngest, Anna, was a perfect blend of both parents, equally comfortable tracking elk and discussing literature. Fletcher and Georgia aged gracefully into their roles as grandparents, their cabin often filled with the laughter and chaos of visiting grandchildren. Fletcher, despite the gray that now dominated his hair and beard, remained strong and vital, still able to handle the physical demands of mountain life. Georgia, her own hair streaked with silver, was the heart of their extended family, the one everyone came to for advice and comfort. On a late summer evening, when Georgia was 52 and Fletcher 55, they sat on the porch they had added to the cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains they had made their home. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of pine, and somewhere in the distance, an elk bugled its challenge to the coming night. "I've been thinking," Fletcher said, his hand finding Georgia's as naturally as breathing. They had been married for nearly 3 decades now, and some gestures had become so habitual they did not even think about them anymore. "About what?" "About how lucky I am. How different my life might have been if I had never agreed to guide you and Samuel to that mansion." He squeezed her hand gently. "I might still be alone, convinced that solitude was what I wanted, never knowing what I was missing." Georgia leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting against him perfectly after all these years. "I was thinking something similar. About how I almost settled for a life without love, thinking it was the practical thing to do. If you had not said something that night at the mansion, I might still be at that ranch, going through the motions of a life instead of really living. We were both due for some luck after the hard times we had been through. It wasn't just luck, it was also courage. Yours, mine, even Samuel's. It took bravery for all of us to be honest about what we really wanted." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky deepen from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear, and Georgia picked out the constellations Fletcher had taught her to identify all those years ago. The Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, Orion's Belt. The sky was so clear out here, so far from any town lights, that the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light. "You ever wonder what happened to Hawthorne's silver?" Fletcher asked suddenly. "The part we left at the mansion." They had taken only what they needed and left the rest hidden, figuring it was safer there than anywhere else. Over the years, they had used a bit more for various needs, buying land around their cabin to ensure their privacy, funding James's education, helping Rose and her husband get started. But there was still a substantial amount left. "Sometimes," Georgia admitted, "why, I think we should give it away, use it to help people the way it helped us." Fletcher shifted to look at her. "We don't need it anymore, we have everything that matters." "But there are folks out there struggling like Samuel was, like you were. Maybe we could make a difference." Georgia felt a surge of love for this man who, despite living apart from society for most of his life, still had such a generous heart. "That's a wonderful idea. How would we do it?" "We could ask Samuel and Margaret to help. They know the community in Ash Fork, know who's struggling and who just needs a hand up. We could set up a fund, help people get started, give them the chance we got." "A fund in Hawthorne's name," Georgia suggested. "He would have liked that, I think. Having his silver used to help people instead of feeding his paranoia." They started planning that very night, and over the following months, they put the plan into action. Samuel and Margaret were enthusiastic partners, helping to establish the Hawthorne Fund that would provide loans and grants to struggling ranchers, settlers, and families in need. It was not charity exactly, more of a hand up, the way the silver had been for them. The fund became their legacy, helping dozens of families over the years. They heard stories of ranches saved, businesses started, dreams realized, all because of the silver that had been hidden away by a lonely, paranoid man. It seemed fitting somehow that Hawthorne's wealth was finally bringing connection and hope instead of isolation and fear. Georgia and Fletcher continued to live in their mountain cabin, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, sustained by love and purpose. They never regretted their choices, never wished for a different life. They had found each other against all odds, had built something beautiful and lasting out of desperation and hope. As they grew older, their bodies less able to handle the harsh demands of mountain winters, they spent more time at the mansion, which they had gradually restored to something like its former glory. It became a gathering place for the whole family, a home base where children and grandchildren could visit, where stories were shared and memories made, On Georgia's 70th birthday, the whole family gathered at the mansion for a celebration. Rose and her husband were there with their 4 children. James came from California with his wife and 2 daughters. Anna, who had stayed closest to home, arrived with her husband and their young son. Samuel and Margaret came too, now in their 80s but still spry and sharp. Tommy, who had taken over the ranch completely, brought his own large family. They filled the mansion with laughter and life, so different from the empty, silent tomb it had been when they first discovered it. Fletcher stood at the head of the long table they had set up in the dining room, his hand on George's shoulder, and looked out at the sea of faces. "I want to say something," he began, his voice still strong despite his 73 years. "Most of you know the story of how your mother and I met, how we came to be here. But what you might not know is that I had given up on happiness before I met her. I had convinced myself that some people were meant to be alone, and I was one of them." Georgia reached up to cover his hand with hers, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that still remained. "Then Georgia came into my life, and everything changed. She taught me that it is never too late to choose love, to choose connection over isolation. She gave me all of you." He gestured at the assembled family. "She gave me a reason to believe that good things can come from dark times, that courage and honesty can lead to happiness. So on her birthday, I want everyone to raise a glass and toast the bravest, kindest, most wonderful woman I have ever known. To Georgia." "To Georgia," the crowd echoed, glasses raised. Georgia stood, tears streaming down her face, and kissed her husband. Around them, their family cheered and applauded, and she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From desperate mail-order bride to this, surrounded by love and legacy and everything that made life worth living. "I love you," she whispered against Fletcher's lips. "I love you too. Always have, always will." The celebration continued late into the night, stories shared and songs sung. The mansion finally fulfilling its purpose as a home filled with warmth and joy. And when everyone had finally gone to bed, Georgia and Fletcher stood on the veranda, looking out at the stars. "We did it," Georgia said softly. "We built something beautiful." "We did," Fletcher agreed, "and it will outlast us. The children, the grandchildren, the fun, the stories, it all continues. No regrets, not a single one, not one." They stood together under the vast mountain sky. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through generations. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of wilderness and home, and Georgia thought about the desperate young woman she had been, marrying a stranger out of necessity. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this perfect sense of belonging. But she had been brave enough to take a chance when it was offered, brave enough to choose love over security, passion over propriety, and that had made all the difference. The years continued their inevitable march, but Georgia and Fletcher faced them together, hand in hand, heart to heart. They watched their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They saw the Hawthorne Fund help hundreds of families. They spent their days surrounded by the mountains they loved and the family they had built. When Fletcher finally passed away at the age of 86, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Georgia holding his hand. She grieved deeply but without regret, knowing they had been granted decades more together than many couples ever received. She lived another 4 years, spending them surrounded by family, sharing stories of their life together, making sure the next generation understood the values and love that had built their family. She died in the spring, in the cabin Fletcher had built for her, with Rose and Anna on either side of her and James holding her hand. Her last words were, "Tell your father I am coming home to him." They buried her next to Fletcher in a quiet spot overlooking the valley, under the shade of tall pines. The whole family gathered, multiple generations united in grief and love. And as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant golds and oranges, they told stories about Georgia and Fletcher, about the love that had started with a desperate situation and a hidden mansion, and had grown into something that changed all their lives. The legacy continued. The cabin became a family retreat. The mansion was maintained as a gathering place. The Hawthorne Fund kept helping people. And the story of Georgia and Fletcher, the mail-order bride and the mountain man who found love in the wilderness, was told and retold, a reminder that courage and love can transform even the most desperate circumstances into something beautiful. Their great-grandchildren played in the mountains they had loved, learned to track and hunt and survive in the wild places. But they also learned to read and dream and love without reservation. They grew up hearing about the woman who had been brave enough to leave a loveless marriage, and the man who had been willing to come out of isolation for a chance at real connection. And somewhere in those mountains, if you listened carefully on quiet nights, you could almost hear two voices carried on the wind, laughing together as they always had, walking hand in hand through the wilderness they had made their heaven on earth. The broke rancher had found his happiness with someone else. The hidden mansion had revealed its treasures, and the mountain man and his bride had lived a love story for the ages. It was a story that proved love was worth fighting for, that happiness was possible even after the darkest times, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose your heart over your fears. Georgia and Fletcher had chosen each other, and in doing so, they had built something that would last far beyond their own lives, a testament to the power of love, courage, and second chances in the wild, beautiful heart of the American West.